RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Pro Athlete Supplementation. Check them out at pas-nutrition.co.uk for all your supplementation needs. And don't forget that subscribers to the Rugby Renegade program get a 40% discount on retail prices. Right, we are back for episode 48 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name's Jamie Bain and today I'm joined by Ed Archer, a good friend of mine, a great strength coach, wealth of experience, currently runs the Athlete Academy and works a lot with the UKSCA. And we'll talk about both of those a lot with his work with youth populations of the Athlete Academy and his entry-level S&C qualification he's working on with the UKSCA. So loads of that, plus loads of training information for rugby players. Give it a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Ed, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Great to have you on. Why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning and some of the teams, sports and athletes you've worked with.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for the invite to have a chat with you. Be good to have a catch up after all these years. My background in S&C goes, stretches back over 20 years now. I was very, very fortunate to get into rugby in 97. I came over from South Africa to do a personal training qualification here. I was just in the right place at the right time, and I don't pretend it was anything more than luck that put me in a position to have a conversation with the then fitness coach at Gloucester, a gentleman by the name of Paul Bolson, who is now director of the athlete factory in Calgary in Canada. And I think what I had at that point is maybe a quite a unique skill set that was not particularly common in the UK at that time, which was, a background in lifting, which I know is difficult for young coaches and even players nowadays to comprehend that was 21 years ago. And I had quite a bit of experience through my own training as a gymnast. I wasn't a particularly good gymnast, but I was an enthusiastic one, and I did quite a bit of supplementary training, so right from school through to university, and developed, I guess, an understanding of the application of resistance training to basic performance gains. And in that time, at school and university, had as a hobby, I guess, helped people from various sports, but not least of all rugby and rowing. And so when I came over here and had the opportunity to meet someone who was involved with a professional outfit, I like to think that I had something to offer, and I got the role as assistant, or in those days was called assistant fitness coach, or fitness coach was the title. There was no such thing as strength and conditioning in name. So that was my start point, I guess. And yes, it was very fortuitous. And as you know, I've never left the area. I've developed a strong link in the community, and have remained in this neck of the woods, although haven't been involved in full time in rugby for over 12 years. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, and something you're quite passionate about is youth athlete. Physical development and things like that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the Athlete Academy, isn't it? Your business.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that. How you approach, training with youth athletes, youth populations.
Well, my involvement with youth was very much an organic process, because working with a professional club, and again, it's difficult for young coaches or people familiar with current professional standards and operations and the numbers of S&C staff involved. But I had almost 18 months where I was entirely on my own in a Premiership rugby club, and that included academy. So I was doing first team academy at one point for over a year, and then slowly the change started where more staff got involved. But even in the 7 years I was working at first team level, I had a real interest in the development side. And, you'd meet 18-year-olds or have 18-year-olds coming into first team training sessions, and you'd think, if only I'd seen this lad when he was 16. So you'd make the time and effort to get to work with the guys who were in the 16 18 cohort. And then you'd work with 16-year-olds for a period of time, and you think, if only I'd met these lads when they were 14, and so on and so forth, until 2006, when I set up the Athlete Academy. We had 8 to 9-year-olds in that cohort, and I think that by the focus or the drive has been to get to work with prepubescents, because in my experience, the response to training and the advantages from competency and foundation movement skills is they get started. And so I see a definite benefit to the young athletes who begin with us pre-puberty as opposed to those who start post-peak height velocity, and how quickly they pick up movements, and then also how well they cope with the changes that come. So I guess my general approach is, one is as young as possible for them to learn the basic movements, and then it's really from there it's about consistency, their consistent exposure to good movement, and once they've developed the skill set, they're then able to advance into more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but more stimulus-based training approaches.
That's cool. And so you've been, like I said, you've been doing that for 12 years now. Have you seen much changing in terms of the kind of preparation level of the young kids as they're coming through? Like sometimes, as you get older, you kind of go, well, when I was younger, it was different. Is that something you've seen?
I think the difference now, the main difference is in the attitude towards it. There's just so much more awareness. If you James Baker from Performance was involved with me in the early stages, and we had a tough time at the start. Schools, parents, there was so much resistance to the notion of young people, young athletes doing any specific movement-based training because of the myths and misconceptions surrounding youth strength training. And that is the biggest change, is that there is much less resistance to the idea. There's a much better general awareness, certainly in the sporting population. We know that there are wider issues relating to youth physical activity, but within the sporting population, it's definitely a much easier sell, and people are far more positive and receptive to the notion of S&C. I would say generally now, even the youngsters have a better idea of what to expect. But then again, we still get the occasional surprise when someone who's playing their sport at a relatively high level is completely uninitiated or unaware of what they could or should be doing to supplement their sporting activity.
Yeah, and that's a great thing that, a coach of your experience, you're working with people at that level. They often say the better coaches should work at the younger age, so you get people coming through with, with that good experience, good level of training, good habits and things like that. So that's great. And you touched on some of the myths and misconceptions in, youth resistance training. Do you want to touch on some of those that kind of been disproved?
Yeah, I think that we there's still concerns around strength training and growth-related factors, and we have such a wide body of research and evidence now to support what we do, and I think it's putting that in the right places. I know that there's been some work done with a few of the sort of broadsheet journalists to try and promote that. But I think it's a slow process of educating people. But I think one of the areas that even as practitioners we need to be cautious about is that a little bit of information can sometimes be a dangerous thing. And I think there's a growing awareness that there is a commercial value to youth training, and often that attracts the wrong people to deliver. And you're talking about having experienced coaches in working with youth, and our systems just aren't structured to deliver that. So it does tend to take individuals who are passionate about working with youth, and a few progressive organizations, but for the most part, as you know, youth sport and academies don't offer the kind of financial packages that enable experienced coaches to take the roles, because experienced coaches will tend to have families and standards of living that an academy salary wouldn't sustain. So but having said that, there's a lot of opportunity in private facilities, use of private facilities or partnerships like I have with schools, in order to be able to deliver the kind of programs that we want to deliver and make it a viable option.
Yeah, it's cool. It's certainly moving in the right direction. So this is a question we ask all the guests on the podcast, and it's, what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
For me, it's not spending the time on developing the mobility and technique to lift really well. I still think that young players in particular and young coaches working with some of the younger players are in too much of a hurry to get big numbers, and there's not enough emphasis on mobility. And I had this conversation with one of the Premiership defence coaches not so long ago, and I asked him what some of the barriers were in his coaching, some of the challenges he had. And, it slayed me that he said he still has an issue with guys in the top level who've got hip mobility problems and can't get into good positions. And from an S&C perspective, I think, that's really, it's just not necessary. It's something that we can be addressing and prioritizing at a young age, and just making sure it's always given kudos in training, that good mobility and the ability to get into good deep positions in a range of exercises and work through full range of motion in a range of exercises is a priority. So that will be, jumps to the forefront in my mind, in my experience of issues that could be addressed more effectively in S&C.
Yeah, and you find if someone's, they're performing exercises like that, with a full range of motion and, with good technique, it kind of takes care of everything else, doesn't it? Everything seems to fall in place then, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think that sometimes we forget, and particularly in data and number-driven programs, is people forget what it is we're there to do, which is improve athleticism.
Yeah.
And, create systems that are more resistant to injury, can move better, can tolerate awkward positions, and underpinning that is mobility. So, I appreciate that there is a bigger move towards using primal-based activities, calisthenic-based movements, and that's great. But also in strength and our strength training, just a real emphasis on good lifting through full range of movement should be the foundation. Are there movements and training objectives where we adapt that? Of course. Shouldn't be to the work.
Yeah, cool. And kind of on a similar sort of thread, what's your opinions on sport-specific training? Sometimes I think that's something that maybe inexperienced coaches they try and develop more sport-specific things, especially with young athletes when they haven't built that foundation. What are your opinions on that?
I'd be inclined to agree with that. I think the ability for an S&C coach, someone who has not been embedded in a sport for many years, the ability to design effective sport-specific programs is unlikely. And I think that we have to work to our strengths. And as young coaches, you've got to work with what you know, and you've got to go to the technical and tactical experts to help and guide the movements and skill sets related to the game. So yes, I think there's too much of a hurry to try and make the conditioning look like the sport before having built a really solid foundation in generalist athleticism, good basic strength, good essentials, speed skills, and the ability to change direction in fairly controlled environments. I think that those remain our bread and butter. When athletes can do that, we can start getting a bit more funky with their programming.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. It's athleticism is the same for all sports. If you make someone more athletic, they've got more potential to perform their sport-specific skills to a higher level, haven't they? Let's move on. Let's talk about. Hopefully, we'll touch a little bit about your work with the UKSCA here. But this is a question we ask all the guests as well: is what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
My first bit of advice is always a question as to whether this is something that they are really passionate about. Is this something you do? Because to try and advance in a field where it's not what you would do, coaching is, we've always got to remember that coaching for a lot of people is an area of enjoyment, and there are many people who coach for a hobby. And if you don't have that, intrinsic love of working with people and getting your hands dirty in a training environment, then you're going to struggle. That's the reality, because you're going to be in competition with people who are just generally enthusiastic about what they do. So that is this something that is ingrained in your practice, ingrained in your lifestyle? Because if it's not, then you probably need to be considering what really does bite you, what really does grab you and genuinely enthuse you. So first rule, I guess, is are you thoroughly enthusiastic about this field?
Yeah, that's cool. I think oftentimes people sort of you've got to think of it as a calling, haven't you? It's that thing that you do even if you weren't being paid for it. If you feel like that about it, then you're definitely going to make the effort to work through the system. But let's touch on your involvement with the UKSCA and what you've been doing in terms of getting an entry level qualification for strength and conditioning coaches.
Yeah, I mean it's been I've been very fortunate in the involvement I've had with the UKSCA. I think that on the whole, the organisation is because it's so strongly member driven. It really is about looking after the best interests of S&C coaches, and one of the things we need to recognise is that there is a lot of practice going on out there, and there are a lot of organizations, institutions, and general public who are completely unaware of the field of strength and conditioning, or that there is, that there is a body of practitioners who are highly skilled, who have a lot to offer, not just in terms of their practical skills, but in terms of their underpinning knowledge, their organizational skills. I think that the strength and conditioning is a profession in the UK, and I'm kind of clear on that. I'm speaking about the UK here because I don't necessarily think it's worldwide. But I think in the UK we have, and I'm allowed to say this because I'm an immigrant. In the UK, there is the profession of strength and conditioning is very, very strong. I think it's made up by a lot of very competent professionals, and we need to do more. And for me, the UKSCA has needed to do more to promote our skills and to help distinguish us from practitioners with less experience, less knowledge, people who may be not as thorough or dedicated to using scientifically based practices. And one of the ways that I suggested during my time on the board of the UKSCA to do that is to create an entry-level qualification that would enable more people to engage with the organization, so draw more people into the field of S&C. However, that they leave that with a clearly defined skill set and all of practice, and understand what their limitations are, what the limitations are of related professions when it comes to training, and recognize the value of experienced and accredited S&C coaches. So it's an exciting project. It has now been signed off by SIMSPA, the new standards, and hopefully that means that at grassroots level now we'll have more practitioners who are able to coach good foundation movement skills, because that will be a requirement for assessment, is that they can run sessions, group sessions, with no equipment in limited facilities, but deliver clear outcomes with regards to movement skills, because I think that's been absent. And as you know, I've had one foot in the fitness industry for in my entire career, and the qualification standards, rather than having risen, have slowly eroded, and I don't think it's been producing a lot of very good practitioners. So from that side, and with respect to people in the fitness industry, I think they've been very excited about partnering with the strength and conditioning profession in order to raise standards. So we look forward to seeing that progress in the new year.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure the stronger the strength and conditioning profession comes, the more you'll find people in the fitness industry, coming across to learn and get the benefits of the the type of courses that you're setting up. So that's great. That sounds brilliant. Another question we often ask is, are there any books or resources you'd recommend for developing strength coaches, or even are there any experts in terms of youth development you'd recommend people sort of follow in social media or whatever to get a bit more information about those types of things?
Well, that's a big question. Yeah, I mean, there is. Well, the one thing that the strength of our position nowadays with the technology available to us is that there is a glut of good information out there, and as a point of call, I think that the UKSCA journals and UKSCA electronic network is a great start point for people, because it then signposts a lot of good information. But there are so many good practitioners now who are putting out information, and yourself included. I think it's the one, rather than highlighting individuals, I think it's about a process, and for young coaches to understand a process of where you go to for information. And I think that the evaluation of expertise must always be done in analysis of delivery, if that makes sense. In other words, start identifying your heroes in a face-to-face context or an in-person context. See people deliver, make the effort to get to see people deliver before swallowing too much of what they're putting out on social media. So, that's a, I think starting local and then expanding from there is where I recommend young coaches to go to. Partly because it also then gets them involved in a practical context, in a delivery context, as opposed to a theorizing and discussion of protocols when that may be very different to how things are actually done on the gym floor or on the pitch side or on the court. We're such a practical field, and that's where the information gathering needs to start.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great advice, because not only do you doing it that way, you kind of build up your experience, you build up your network from a local area, and then kind of branch out in a way that's building experience
absolutely.
At the same time.
The learning, yeah.
Lastly, Ed, where can people learn more about you?
Well, I'm not terribly proactive online, but I do have the Athlete Academy is my baby. I have a website, athleteacademy.net, which could do with a bit of updating. I'm contactable. I'm always open to questions via email and phone calls. I think that I know that the UKSCA is not without its critics, but I fully believe that the more people engage through the organisation, the better the organisation is, and the more we all benefit as a profession. There is strength in numbers, and there's strength in commitment. So that's always my recommendation is people involved in and get product field and network with people who are have a firm stand in the field and have a reputation for being good practitioners, number one, and the social media side of it is secondary to delivery.
Yeah, we'll of course share links to your website in the show notes. But Ed, great to catch up with you, and thanks for telling us about your career and your work and giving some great advice. Much appreciated, and just wish you all the best.
Thanks, Jamie. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, man.
Cheers. So great to hear from Ed and hear what he's doing with the UKSCA and, of course, with the youth populations with Athlete Academy. Great insight into what he does, and definitely worth listening if you want to work with younger athletes and academy populations. So please share that with anyone who you think that might be helpful with. And of course, in the meantime, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com and check us out on social media. And please subscribe to us and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.